Got it.
Oh, okay. I've got a new phone and I don't know if I can turn it off or not. Peggy,
Yes,
you
ma'am.
know those 3 sets of, what do you call them, slides? I couldn't access them printing them,
You could see them, but they wouldn't print.
not for me.
Well,
All the others have, so I don't know.
well, that's weird.
It's okay, I'll just.
I don't understand Google Drive. I do something and sometimes it works, but I can't say I understand it. And I get a weird message when I send those. I get a weird message that says I don't have privileges and my settings may have changed. Now, I don't know what that means, but I've since found that people do get them, even though it tells me I don't have privileges. So I wish I could help, but I don't.
It's okay.
What you can do is bring a little USB stick and I'll just give them to you and then you can just put them on your computer and do whatever you want with them.
So don't let me slow you down there.
No, I'm just waiting. I'm all ready.
All right, here's my little item.
All righty.
I brought mine too, Peggy.
Okay.
Based on our
Then-
conversation. See, I don't even know how big this is, but that's not your problem.
So you have some of them. You don't
Oh,
need,
yeah, well,
which ones do you have?
I
No?
have the ones from our last series, you know, the mythology. It's just these 3
Okay,
that you
well,
sent.
I sent out 6, so you didn't get them.
6?
Yeah. So maybe you didn't get them all.
Oh, rats.
Listen. In a minute, I'll get that in a minute. Here we go. There we go. Okay.
Oh, that is one
Oh,
fancy lectern you have there.
well, that's the one they used from the forum.
Liking this.
Oh, this. I was looking for something the right height. I couldn't find anything. And then I saw that and got it.
So you should decoupage it.
Whatever's there. Oh, a lot of people are on. A lot of people didn't come in. People, it's beautiful here at the church. It's very warm. In fact, it's almost too warm.
Well, it's comfortable. So.
Okay, USB stick.
Hi.
Um,
Am I sitting in somebody's place?
No,
Is that true?
this is mine and this is my friend.
Okay, all right, good.
Hi there, Susan.
Hi, how are you?
Fine, how are you?
okay,
How was yours?
so
I'm sorry?
How was yours?
He's doing great.
Doing great.
He is, honestly, with a.
Western.
Ah,
So.
glad to know
There's
that.
the slides.
In the sunshine, walking around.
Yeah.
In a little more than a week, we went from -0 to 61 degrees.
I'm not
This
complaining,
is
are
the
you?
craziest place in the world, though.
Makes it interesting.
Yeah, combination, isn't it?
Yes. Oh, so these, well,
Where did it go? Okay.
how do you even know what you're doing?
I'm just dragging them onto your drive. Because I numbered them, they're gonna come out. Like you've got all of the mythology ones.
I do.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But then these are also numbered 1, 2. So they're gonna come out 1, 1, 2, 2.
Oh.
So you're gonna have to pull out but they're labeled, so you can't miss them.
No.
But unfortunately, probably should have made a folder for them before I drug them over there. So they wouldn't get intermixed. So are they there? They're there. That's it. Boy.
You're gonna have a lot of Zoomers today, yeah?
Yeah, I already do have a bunch of people already signed in on Zoom. Okay, so there's that. Okay, that should be it. And
Everything in a
next,
nutshell, so to speak.
yep, everything on a USB drive.
Thanks a million. And where's your envelope for? There, okay.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. I set that out so I remember to talk about.
It's
Okay.
books that are Zooming today, so I don't know if he's got.
I have none of them.
Okay,
Yeah, already.
so let's see. You got on your drive here.
Is someone sitting?
You got nothing. Okay,
Oh,
perfect. So, wait a minute.
that's nice. Yeah. Thanks.
I'm gonna make you a folder so they don't
Let's see.
get mixed up. Oh, wait a minute. No, you've got prehistory in Egypt is on here. Greece is on.
I don't
No,
know.
they're downloading already.
Oh, I see.
I see. Then Rome is downloading. I didn't realize they'd caught. So they are downloading on here, but they're intermixed with the mythology ones, but they're labeled so you can see which is which. The mythology all start with myth, word
Oh,
myth.
mythology from the last.
Yeah, from the last class are on here.
Great, I don't have them either. and that's-
Some, there's a few, not all, but there's a few from mythology.
I didn't, what'd you say?
That not all the mythology ones are on here, but you have some. Don't know why, but they are. Okay, so see, this is what your drive looks like now. You've got prehistory, Egypt, Near East, Aegean, creation of man, that goes back to mythology. What I'm gonna do, I'm gonna make you a folder. New folder. And I'm gonna label it mythology. And I'm gonna move your mythology ones into that folder so you don't get them mixed up. Come on. Myth and mythology. And this one in mythology. And come on. Come on. Sometimes it just doesn't want to. Myths. Damn it. It doesn't want to drag. Well, you can figure it out, which ones are mythology and which ones are this class.
So
Okay.
Peggy.
There you go. So this is everything from the ancient world. When we get later, bring it back again later and we'll give you the next bunch.
Okay, but Peggy, when there's some stuff from mythology on here?
Yeah, a few. I think there's 3 files from
But when
mythology
I
on there.
brought this to you, there was nothing on there.
Well, there had to have been, because I didn't put,
I know, I'm asking you.
yeah, I don't, they had to have been on there.
Yeah. Huh?
Yeah, they had to have been on there because I didn't put them on and they're there now.
Well, God knows I didn't.
Well, they're somehow.
Yeah, I mean, nobody's had access
Yeah,
to it.
yeah, I didn't put them on.
Anyway, is it better to talk to you after class about how to get to the?
Yeah, because I can pull up yeah, wait till after class because then I can go there online
And you can show
show.
me how to get to Zoom? in
Yeah,
case?
absolutely.
Okay.
Well, a lot of people stayed home today. Well, it looks like 7, 6. Okay, Zoomies, if you'll, I think you already have all muted. But if not, be sure to mute before we start. And I'm gonna try and do this. And there's more. I think it's actually warm in here. What the heck? I brought my sweater, whatever, and it's hot in here.
70 last week and 61 today.
Yeah, this building heated up. We still don't have actual heat in here, so it's just the sun.
There was warm yesterday. Made sandwiches.
Well, I'm glad some of you are here. It makes it easier for me. Give it another couple minutes. I'm glad we could be back. I hope it doesn't, I hope we get the heat on before it gets cold again. I haven't heard anything more about
What's the matter? What's the matter with it?
something with the boilers not working. They've been working on it. I don't know what's heats up stuff. That's all I know. It heats stuff up. It boils water. I know that. Yay.
2 weeks, but this week turned out okay.
If I get it, Susie does know.
Hi, Susie. I don't just because. My friend had it. And I'm sorry to make it sad.
Where is it now, on the pages? Somewhere is that?
Still, I think, he was gonna go to somewhere down.
Like some more water.
Now, but.
Every year.
Well, it's the same. Usually, it does, and now he's trying a couple new cities in. No, I can still get it. That's part of the work. And I go back.
I wish I would have known that was, you don't always have been here.
Well,
Because I don't know that.
You might be here.
Oh, absolutely.
I think. Really.
I need
And we.
an audience. Yeah,
I was glad we-
I wasn't happy with last week.
Oh, yeah, we were. I wanted to.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I did make a few extras. Those are more up to date. It's an up to date version of the old one. You want one, Rayanne? It's the same thing. Yeah, it's not a new handout. Okay, before we get started,
It wasn't as good because we didn't have, you were really in, going back and forth with the audience.
yeah, I was not happy about last week's Zoom class. I don't want to do that again. And I think whatever happens, I'm going to try and come in here for any stalwarts who want to come in, even if it gets cold again. I'd rather be in a space like this. It was not comfortable.
You did it from home?
I did it from home.
I got it.
Yeah, I did it from home. Anyway, before we get started, I haven't talked about this before. It's really only our third class. I never do on the first class. The last class, our second class was last week, and I couldn't do much of anything. But I want to talk about donations. There is no charge for this class. However, from the beginning, I've asked for anyone who wants to make a donation. It's not a deal breaker. You're perfectly welcome here if you don't. However, All Souls lets us use this space for no charge at all, equipment and everything. So if you're so inclined and feel that there is any value in what you're getting and wish to make a donation of any kind, you're welcome to do so. I always have this envelope here every week. If you want to do a one-time, if you want to write a check, it's just to All Souls. If you just want to throw in a little cash or nothing at all, that's fine. But I'm just going to leave this on the table afterwards if you want to put something in, and I'll just have this here every week in case anyone, it's all goes to the church. Nothing is coming to me. It all goes for the church for the use of the space, because I'm just anticipating with some, I'm just hoping they're not going to reach the point and say, listen, you're just getting too big. You're taking up too much of our space and time, but they're letting us do this. And this is a very busy room. I mean, a lot of groups use this space. I just found a little niche here Friday afternoon where nobody was using it and I grabbed it.
Things like this are what the church is here for.
It absolutely is. This is our
You're not-
community outreach
You
from
wrote
the
all
church.
them, they owe you, so.
Oh, thank you. Okay, not sure about that, but this is my service. If you, for the Unitarians, understand, service is a huge part of what we do. And so this, for me, this is service. If this is of any benefit to anybody, then that's part of
Yeah, that's.
my practices as a Unitarian. Okay, anyway, last time I thought I'd do a little bit of just to take a few minutes review because it was kind of awkward and difficult last time. Last time we talked about the Minoans, and they were a civilization on the island of Crete that we don't know much about because we haven't translated the language. And what we looked at was that building, which sometimes referred to as the Palace of Minos, although we don't know that it's actually a palace and we don't know that there was anyone named Minos. It's just a name. That happens a lot with art, architectural finds. You've got to name something because you have to be able to talk about it. You have to be able to, identify it. So someone makes up a name and then that name just sticks like forever. That's a plan of the building. The main point about the Minoans is they were an island, a maritime people. They were peaceful people. Their imagery centered around the sea, plants and animals. They're not a militaristic culture, and they seem to have been shippers in the Mediterranean and served a lot of different people. In many ways, a more important culture that I want to talk about now, overlapping with them on the mainland, are the Mycenaeans. And I want to talk a little bit about how we know these people. I told you last time that British archaeologist Sir Arthur Evans discovered that site at Crete because he was looking for King Minos from the Greek myth of Theseus and the Minotaur. There was a King Minos. And so he set out, he says, well, what if this myth is true? Let's find this king. But he was actually influenced by an earlier archaeologist who's really the one who started this craze of kind of hunting for the ancient past. And his name is Heinrich Schliemann, a German archaeologist. Really an amateur archaeologist, as many were in the 19th century. He started out, firmly believing in Homer and the stories of Homer and the stories from the Iliad, the Trojan War. And the Trojan War tells about the heroes, the Achaeans, who we identify as the Greeks, and their leader, Agamemnon, and talks about the city he lived in. So Schliemann set out to find, first of all, Troy. He wanted to find a site of Troy to prove that this story is true. And he first does find the site. He's sailing northeast. There's a lot of clues in the Iliad as to where Troy might have been in terms of where the ships sailed, how long it took them. And so he said, well, if we assume the Achaeans are Greeks and they sailed northeast for a certain period, then Troy must be along the coast of Turkey or Anatolia, as it was known in the ancient world. So he goes up and starts digging, and he finds on one of the mounds a site that has been pretty much accepted as this was the site of Troy. Although in excavating, he found a number of different layers of civilization, and he was on the wrong layer, but he was at the right site. Nonetheless, pretty good. But Schliemann, like most 19th century archaeologists, was really a treasure hunter. They weren't academic scholars the way archaeologists are today. They weren't out rooting through garbage dumps to find little pieces of clay pots. They wanted gold. They wanted jewelry. They were treasure hunters. And that's what he found. And Mycenae was often described as and called the city of gold. So he wanted to find the city of gold. So let's not give them too awfully much credit. 19th century archaeologists did a lot of damage. They went in almost like bulldozers, just destroying important things that we could have learned from, because they weren't concerned about what we could learn. They were concerned with finding treasure. And so, they're kind of a blot on, and very different from modern day archaeology. So after he found Troy, in 1873, he says, well, then Mycenae must exist as well. So he goes back to Greece and he finds the ruins of this city. And you can see it's identified there in the Peloponnesus. And we'll talk about Greece and the maps of it in just a little bit. If you were in the mythology class, you know the myths of Mycenae with Agamemnon and all the wonderful stories about Mycenae. So that's the city he wanted to find. He found, oh, here we are. Here's a photo. I found some photos of Heinrich Schliemann, and that's his wife, Sophia, wearing the treasures of Troy. There are a number of pictures of her wearing just the jewels and gold and all of the things that were looted basically from Troy. I love old photos. But these are the ruins that he found in the Argolid. The Argolid is a reference to this peninsula that you see right here. And I don't know if I can. There used to be a pointer, a laser pointer thing over here. Now I can't find one. But this is called the Argolid, this region, and Mycenae is located right about there. Now, we have no idea, number one, if there was a city called Mycenae, and number two, if this is it, even if there was, but he decided it was. So we still call this site Mycenae. Just keep in the back of your mind, it might not be. It is actually older. Archaeologists have determined that if the Trojan War story is true, we have a pretty good sense of around the date, would have been around 1200 or so BCE. And this is actually a little earlier than that. So it's unlikely that it's the same city, that even if it's the right location. But nonetheless, Mycenaean is the name given to the culture in general, because we don't know exactly what I don't think they actually had a collective name for themselves. There were, all the Greek city-states were involved in the Trojan War. Cities from all over the region sent ships and soldiers. And in fact, they saw themselves as independent city-states. There was really no collective name they used for themselves. But Schliemann wanted a collective name, so he calls them all Mycenaeans. So it's people who live around the same time, a shared culture. It seems to be roughly a shared language, although written variation, there are different written variations. So this is the city, and you can learn a lot. Now they do have a written language. It's called Linear B, and unlike the Linear A of the Minoans, we have translated Linear B. So we know a lot more. It is an early version of Greek. We can see how it doesn't look like modern day Greek because they're not using the Phoenician alphabet. The current written Greek is based on the Phoenician alphabet, which they haven't adopted yet at this time. We have no way of knowing what the spoken language is. Obviously, there are no recordings or anything, but it does seem to be an early variation. Modern Greeks wouldn't be able to understand it, but then most of us can't understand Old English either. And so it really is pre-Greek. These are the ancestors of the Greeks. So let's take a look at this site. Here is a reconstructed view of the citadel. Now, this is considered a citadel, and a citadel is, you can see the massive walls around Mycenae. He called it the city of Agamemnon. Now, this is a very different culture from the Minoan. This is clearly a warrior culture. You can recognize a warrior culture in a minute. First of all, they have big, thick defensive walls. There's a reason you build walls like this. You must need protection from somebody. Also art, the art shows warriors and hunters, and there are ways to recognize what mattered to people. Those walls are actually not just solid walls, but they have an internal passageway. You can go into the wall and actually travel all around the city and then come out somewhere else, which was an interesting defensive tactic. There were a lot of things stored in the walls, including weapons, but it's a big storage area. So if the city were ever breached, You could go into the walls and you know, you're really protected in there, and you can pop out somewhere else in the city. I mean, it's very defensive, not only from the outside, but even from the inside if somebody gets into the city. So very important. This area down in the lower right where you see the big round circle, that's where the graves were, shaft graves. They used what are called shaft graves. They're basically just shafts dug deep down. And there are a number of different sites, and we found a lot of things. I'll show you some things from the shaft graves. This is not one building. These are all different buildings. A citadel is basically a kind of the city center. It's where the elite might live, where business is done, the palace is there. All the buildings themselves are fairly simple. They're what we call megarons, and a megaron is just a simple architectural design. It's basically just a rectangle it's designed with an axis running right down the center. As you can see, the design is very reminiscent of what we're going to see as the plan of Greek temples a little later. This is really the beginning of the design of the megaron. So very simple design. Now, the city itself would have been built outside the walls as well. This is like a medieval castle in the sense that you have, you know, a walled citadel, but the city is around it. And if someone attacks, everybody runs inside the walls. So it's very much like a medieval city. In fact, all of the people that lived in this area in Greece at the time Schliemann excavated all believed this was a medieval ruin. They thought these were the ruins of a medieval castle. It's what they'd always believed for generations. But excavation and other things have shown us it's not. It actually dates quite early, but that's why no one had really paid attention to it. They just thought it was another medieval castle in Greece.
What does
Megaron is just the name of an architectural style where you have a simple rectangular room symmetrically aligned. That's called a megaron design. And megarons are going to appear in architecture later as well. Now, here's what remains of the walls. They're not as big as they were at one time, but they're using massive blocks. It's hard to read the scale. I'm going to show you other image in a minute where you see some people in the scale. Those blocks are a lot bigger than you think they are. They're really quite large. And you can see at the bottom how they've used stone and other materials to angle out, making it harder to climb the walls or to hide from anyone above. This is the approach to the gate. The gate is one of the most famous parts of the structure. It's the very famous lion gate, as it's known. And so you can see some people there and get a sense of the blocks. These kinds of blocks in architecture, this is known as cyclopean architecture. What that means is they're just using these massive blocks. They're cyclopean because they set the idea is they're so big and heavy that only a cyclops could lift them. So it started to be called cyclopean, which just means big and heavy. That's all it really means. But you can see they're much larger than, I mean, we have a sense of the size of a brick or a concrete block. So in our minds, we think of it as about this size, but these are clearly not. They're massive structures. But what's most interesting is what you see above the lintel of the gate, and that is a sculpture that I want to take a look at, which is known as the Lion Gate. I love the photo on the right. This is Schliemann. He's older here. This is Heinrich Schliemann, and this is his wife, Sophia, over here, and other archaeologists. The lion sculpture is actually made out of a different stone. It's set in what we call a relieving triangle. Often when you have post and lintel architecture, meaning you have a horizontal lintel here, look how thick that is to give it strength. But still, that's the weakest point. In the middle of a lintel is the weakest point. So what they typically would do is cut away from the heavy stone and remove it and either leave an open space so there's no weight pressing down on the lintel, or in this case, they replaced it with a much lighter weight stone. So it's a different stone. It's more for carving. You can see it's a more refined stone, fine stone, but it's the detail of the lions that are important. What we have here are two figures facing one another, with a column in the middle and an entablature on top. Now, what first interesting element of this design is that is a Minoan column in the middle. It's narrower at the bottom and wider at the top. Now, this is right about the time that the Mycenaeans had conquered the Minoans. The Minoans do finally fall to the Mycenaeans. These people know Mycenaeans, and they're really ruling on the island of Crete by this time. So they've been influenced by that design. What's more interesting is the head of the lions are gone. And you can tell from the sculpture, if you could climb up there and look, you could see that they were actually separate pieces, that they were added separately. And there's like a hole there where a dowel would have been pushed down. They're gone. We don't know what they were. This is earthquake country. They would have fallen off, who knows when, broken. They're long gone, which means we don't know what those heads were. Why is that significant? Have we seen anything in art that had the body of a lion and the head of something else? Sure, we have in Assyria, those Lamassu figures with the body of a lion and the wings of an eagle and the head of a person. Well, if this is the head of a lion, that's one thing. If these were heads of man, that's something else altogether. And it tells you about a relationship. We already are getting a clue here that these builders were familiar with Assyrian art, Near Eastern art. First of all, the design itself, it's a heraldic design. We've seen heraldic design before, as early as 2500 BCE, the Sumerian, where you had two bulls with the head of men, in this case, with a man in the middle. I talked about the heraldic design, the design style where you have one thing in the middle and then two animal forms or two forms of some kind mirroring each other on either side. It's very similar design. We saw it in figures like these. So if those were a man's head, then that clinches. They absolutely knew this art. Someone had traveled to the Near East. They had seen what was made there and brought that back. So whatever they are, I believe there's clear evidence of Near Eastern influence here in this design. And if they were humans, then that cinches it, if they were human heads, because nobody else did that. It is the city of kings, or this is what Schliemann used to argue this is the city of Agamemnon. He says this gate identifies it as a city of a king because of the gateway, that these lions tell us that this symbolizes a king. So it must be Agamemnon. That's his argument. We don't know if that's true or not. Nonetheless, it's a good argument. And it would be nice to know, but we will probably never know. But you can't say that because we can read their language, which means you can always find some written document, some piece of something somewhere that makes some mention of a name or whatever. If you can read the language, it's always possible to learn more. Yes.
What would they have written on in that time period?
Depending on the function, they use papyrus in the same way the Egyptians used papyrus, but for permanent inscriptions, it would be on stone or clay. We found a lot of clay that has inscriptions baked onto it. So could be, if it's papyrus, we probably are never going to find it. But you could always find some clay thing buried in a grave or even stone inscriptions on something. It's interesting to compare the so-called palace, whatever that building is, the Minoan building, and the differences are obvious. That is one building. The Minoan structure is one single connected building, sprawling building. There are no protective walls around Minoan palaces or buildings at all. They weren't afraid of anybody, so they didn't build protective walls. So it's a very different culture and will fall to Mycenae. Now,
were the Minoans at Knossos?
Knossos, yeah.
Oh.
I know they pronounce it Knossos now, but the correct Greek pronunciation is Knossos with a K. Yeah.
Do we know what happened to that?
Mycenae?
Yeah.
Mycenae, it's a combination, well, we kind of do. Let me come back to that. As soon as I finish my scene, I'll talk about the Dark Ages, and that'll go into what happened to them, because several people think they know, but they don't. There's no absolute agreement as to what happened. It's complex, not quite as easy as the Minoans, who were defeated. And eventually more Greeks, more people from the mainland, and the people on Crete became more Greek and less what they were before, which was largely Phoenician and Eastern Mediterranean. They weren't Greek at the time the Minoans were there. They were ethnically different, but they've changed now. Okay, in the shaft graves, and there's one of the grave circles, there are several grave circles and a number of shafts in them. The most famous object that Schliemann found, or says he found, depending on your point of view, is the Mask of Agamemnon. It's one of the most famous pieces. However, that mask was questioned, its authenticity was questioned even at the time, even in Schliemann's day, it was questioned. We went through a long period where nobody believed this was real, that this was believed to be a fake. We're coming back around now with new technology, and now people are saying, no, this isn't a fake. And it's actually earlier than Schliemann than Troy would have existed. So either way, it's not Agamemnon, because the dates are wrong. But it may not be a fake after all. Now, why would people think it was a fake? First of all,
What do you mean by fake?
not authentic, made by Schliemann or somebody. People have been making replicas of things forever. It's easy enough to take a replica and slip it in. But Schliemann had a bad reputation. He had a reputation for salting his finds. He was well known for putting things in his finds that weren't in his finds. I mean, he was known for that. So you should never take anything he says absolutely. He was well known for that. So
I think what I was told, that he said he would give all this stuff to Greece, and then when he found it, he took it to Germany.
yeah, he kept most of it, actually. He didn't give much to anybody. His wife got most of the jewelry. But first of all, there are 7 of these death masks found at Mycenae. And this looks nothing like any of the others. It's an entirely different style than the others. Number one, that should stand out. What they're saying now is it doesn't match them because it's actually much earlier. The other argument is, I remember when I first studied this, I mean, that if there's anything that looks 19th century, it's that handlebar mustache. I mean, it just looks so wrong. It doesn't look Greek. It looks German 1870s when it was dug up. So to me, it always looked like a fake, but that doesn't mean it is. So where we are now, we don't know, but I think more people now think it's not a fake, but it's earlier, that somehow it got into this grave because it had been around for maybe a couple hundred years and got buried in that grave for some reason. Anyway, it's really quite famous. The dagger, however, is authentic. Nobody's questioning that. And it's a beautiful little dagger blade. It's made of bronze. It was originally bronze, gold, silver inlay in niello. And niello is the black background. Niello is actually made of sulfur. It's a combination it's a compound made with copper, lead, and sulfur, and it makes this black background. It's used in a lot of art in the ancient world to get that black background. But you have lions, a deer hunt. It's very Mycenaean with hunting scenes, an animal hunt scene. So that speaks of a particular, the nature of a certain kind of culture as well. So let's talk about what happened to, because we're about to enter around 1000 or so, we enter into the Dark Ages in Greece. It's a period that we've needed to learn more information about for a long time. We don't know exactly what it means. What we do know is around 1000 BCE or so, 1100, 1000, somewhere in there, Cities all along the coastline of Greece, cities all through are abandoned. Some of them are just damaged and destroyed. People moved up into the mountains. There are a lot of different arguments for what happened. We're looking at climate changes that could have pushed people away from the coast. We're looking at invasions of people called the Sea People. The Sea People is another one of those vague things from the ancient world. We know there were marauders in the Eastern Mediterranean. They're known as the Sea People. It's all we know about them. And we know they did a lot of damage on the coast of Egypt, Eastern Mediterranean, and the coastlines of Greece, which could have caused people to abandon the coastline. We also know there were people who invaded Greece called the Dorians. When I was an undergrad, it was cut and dry. It was a Dorian invasion. That was it. That's what ended these cities, the Dorian invasion. People called the Dorians, the tribal name, came down, conquered the Greeks. And then people started challenging this idea. Who were the Dorians? I don't see them, there weren't any Dorians. I don't even know what you're talking about. What do you mean? And so people started challenging that idea. And now it's even more confused than it was before, because we really don't know why cities were abandoned. What we do know is language changes after that. When the cities begin to be inhabited again by around 900, they come back down out of the mountains, start building new cities, re-inhabiting some old cities. They're speaking a recognizable Greek, and they've embraced the Phoenician alphabet, and they're writing Greek, ancient Greek, Homeric Greek, really early form of Greek that we recognize today as clearly Greek. So there are big changes that happen, and as to why it's still dark.
So the Dark Ages is only 100 years?
No, we're guessing 200-300 years probably. It could be 1100, could be 1200, could be 9. It's shortly after the Trojan War, 1200. We don't know. We're guessing a lot. We guess. Archaeologists guess. Yeah.
Again, about where the Phoenicians are from.
The Phoenicians, by 900, they're in the east, Eastern Mediterranean, like Syria and where Israel and all of the Eastern Mediterranean, but they're also all along North Africa by this time. They're on some of the islands. They were a large, very important group in the Mediterranean region for a while. And they had one of the earliest sort of written phonetic alphabets, although it was all consonants. What the Greeks did when they borrowed it is they made some changes and they added vowels, which didn't exist in Phoenician. But yeah, Phoenicians are not as well known as the Greeks either. And I don't know why. I don't know any scholars in the field. We wonder why we don't know things. I mean, there aren't that many archaeologists in the world. I mean, classical archaeology is not a huge field of study. There, compared to people studying other fields of learning or other fields of history, it's a small group of people. And it takes a long time, generations to really learn. Lest you think we know everything, we don't. We desperately need people going into these areas. It's a hard field because, first of all, you have to have a lot of language skills. You have to be a real linguist, and that can set you back if you're not a natural linguist. That can be difficult. So yeah, we just have a lot more to learn. But when people do come back, we, by 900 or so, we have, what we think of as Greece. And here's a map. I showed maps in the mythology class. I'll show more because I like maps, just to get some terminology. This is what is modern day Turkey over here on the right. In the ancient world, it's known as Anatolia. It's also known as Asia Minor. I'll use both of those terms now and again. Fairly early on, after 900 or so, we find Greek colonies all along that coastline, along Asia Minor. And there's my cursor, all along here, especially in the south. These are Greek colonies, Ionia, those are Greeks, Ionians are Greeks. And all these are Greek cities, Miletus, etc. There are also Greek colonies on Italy. In Italy, I'll show you maps of Italy all along the coastline of Italy, Sicily. So Greece is not just on the mainland of Greece, it's on the islands, it's all around. So the mainland, we've got a number of different peninsulas. This is Attica, where Athens is located. The Peloponnesus is the largest peninsula, which has a lot of different regions. Arcadia, Laconia is where Sparta is located. The Argolid, whoops, moved the cursor too much. Euboea, you can't tell from this map, it's badly made, is actually an island. It looks like it's attached, but it's not. Here we go. It looks like it's attached here, but that's not true. It's actually an island. And all of this up into Thessaly. As we get, doggone it, as we get up into Macedonia, which is still Greek, understand there are many Greek languages. All these different regions that have slightly different dialects of Greek, written differently. They use different letters. They spell things differently. And it's great for us because when we look at a vase and it's got something written on it, which they often do, you can tell from the writing where it's from because they're spelling it differently or they're using different letters. So it helps. The spoken language seems to have been similar. They all spoke to one another, but they would write things slightly differently. So this is where we're starting. Now, when we talk about Greece, the Hellenic world, we're out of the Helladic and now we're in the Hellenic. We're out of the Bronze Age and we're now in the Iron Age. And this is just Greece. This isn't pre-Greece anymore. This is the Greek world. And we divide it into various periods. The earliest, the geometric, I want to look at one vase from that period. It's very early. We don't have much from that period. We have very little sculpture and almost no large sculpture, no large architecture. And there's a reason for that because they were largely building in wood and sculptures were wood, and wood just doesn't last until they start building in marble or stone and start carving in stone. That's when we start getting things. And that doesn't happen until the Archaic period. So most of what we will look at is in the Archaic and the Classical. The Hellenistic is a late period, and that's not really purely Greek. We'll talk about that. Purest Greek period are early Archaic and Classical. You can see how things change quickly. You know, when we talked about Egypt and how things didn't change, you know, 1,000 years later, everything looks the same. In Greece, there are times when 5 years later, things don't look the same. You can date the changes. The change is rapid. And you can see that when you look at these dates, and we'll talk about sort of why. Vases are what we want to find. Vases give you the most information. These are what you usually find in shards, pot shards, and in garbage dumps, because that's where archaeologists want to dig. You want to find the garbage dump. You want to find the pot shards, because that's where you get information, where you can date layers from pottery. There are over 35 different really specific Greek vase shapes, but these are the most common ones. I think we're going to look at craters. We're going to look at amphoras. These are the amphoras. They're probably the most ubiquitous. Craters as well. They're kylex drinking cups, aquaes. There are all sorts of different vase shapes. I have to tell you about a class I took. I had a class in Aegean archaeology with Saul Weinberg, who was a very important specialist. I don't know if you know this, but the University of Missouri in Columbia is the center of Greco-Roman archaeology. Other than Cornell, if you don't go to Cornell or a couple of other places, Missouri is the place to be. And at the time, it was the only undergraduate degree offered in classical archaeology other than Cornell in this country. So when I got my degree in classical archaeology, there weren't many. And Saul Weinberg was really well known in the field. And there were only, I think, like 6 of us in the class, and the other 5 were all grad students, and I was an undergrad. And he just taught. I mean, we no textbook. You know, he did give us his book that we read, but we studied these little pieces of pot. He could take a little piece of broken pot, and from the curvature, whatever, he knew exactly where that was on a vase. He could, from the little bit of remaining imagery, from the thickness, he could identify it, tell you exactly what it looked like. And I remember our final exam, he came in and he handed us each a little box that had like 5 potsherds in it, and each one had a number, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then he walked out of the room, and that was it. And we just sat there like looking at each other, like, what are we supposed to do with this? Because you can't just do that. I mean, that was a life. There's no way any of us could pick up this thing. And so we just, you know, what the heck, and just started writing, and went for it. But I will always remember that experience of just sitting there looking at this box of little broken pieces of pottery. Like, someone actually expects me to be able to do this. I can't do this. It must have been okay because, you know, obviously I passed the class, because nobody else could do it either. I mean, he was a bit optimistic, but it was just wonderful working, you know, that closely with somebody like him. So that was one of the great experiences of my life in terms of teachers. So let's look at one of these pots. This is a crater. It's the oldest intact crater that we have. It's a funerary crater, and it was found at a cemetery outside Athens. These were often used as grave markers. Cremation was the typical practice at the time, and then the remains would be buried, and then there would be some kind of a marker. Now, pots were only used very early on. They stopped doing this fairly quickly and start using stone, like steles, more like our, you know, tombstones, similar to that. But this is an early one. It's black figure style, and I'm going to talk more a little bit later about how these pots were made and the different styles. But this is black figure, meaning the figures are black, and the background is the natural red that comes from the clay near Athens. Pots from around Athens were the most desirable and sought after, and we find them all around the Mediterranean world. They were used for export. In fact, as early as the 14th century, as early as like 1306, BCE, we know about shipping. In fact, there was a ship excavated off the coast of Turkey that sank in 1306, and we know this from some material on the ship. And the ship had, it contained metal ingots, bronze weapons and tools, fruits and spices, jewelry and beads, African ebony, ivory tusks, ostrich eggs, discs of blue glass that would be used for melting down, for making things. It had ceramics from the Near East, from Greece, and from Cyprus. It had gold scarab with imagery on it associated with Nefertiti, and this is exactly the same time frame when Akhenaten and Nefertiti would have been in power. And it had a whole big section filled with freshly cut firewood, and that's how we dated it from the firewood, because it's wood, so you could use dendrochronology and date when that wood was cut. Now, what you've got here is a kind of shopping list. What it shows us is that ships like this were simply sailing all around the Mediterranean from port to port and picking up and dropping off and picking up and dropping off and just sailing all around the Mediterranean. And that's in 1306. So shipping, you know, later after 900, exporting everywhere. One thing we do know from underwater archaeology, which is really the big area today in archaeology, is that the Mediterranean is littered with ships. The entire bottom of the Mediterranean is covered with vessels from throughout all of history, piled on top of one another. I mean, there's no seabed, it's just ships and layers of ships. And isn't that interesting? I mean, that's where you want to go. You go down to the bottom of the Mediterranean and you just find ship after ship after ship. And most of them have never been excavated. So, you know, we've got all these, it's like the layers of earth you're digging through. Now you're digging through the layers of ships. And I'll show you really interesting pieces found on those ships.
How would this be so well preserved? I mean, if it's a marker for a grave.
Yeah, I don't know its history. First of all, I suspect it has been reconstructed. I suspect it probably was broken, but probably got covered up. The best way to preserve things is to cover them with dirt, I suspect. Don't quote me, but I suspect it got broken and then buried and then found and put back together. But it was the pieces, like, because it was in the cemetery, all the pieces were still there. I mean, if a pot breaks and you put it in your trash, the pieces are going to get all separated and there's nothing to put back together again. But this got preserved like that. But that's my guess, because yeah, it would be very unusual, and it is unusual. It's like the only one, so it's not like this happened all the time. But it's a funerary crater. Yeah.
So, did they give the name to this period because of the geometric designs that are used on the?
Yes, very good. That's exactly why. It's the period where everything is just geometric. It's like they're coming out of the Dark Ages and it's like starting over. One thing you notice, and I'll show you a detail so you can see the images better in a minute. It's very crude. It's not a sophisticated imagery at all. It's almost like you're starting over again, and they start with geometry, which is very Greek, actually, and literally it's very Greek. So that's why it's called the geometric period.
Well, I saw a couple of pieces when I was at the Louvre last summer, and it was they called them dolls, and they would have and they were, I guess they said they were actually done on a wheel, which kind of surprises me.
Oh, the wheels, yeah, they definitely had
Okay,
a
so it
wheel.
was a bell shape. The handle of the bell was actually like a face. So you would see a slight indentation of the nose and eyes. And then they had a piece of metal inside underneath, and then they would have two legs hanging off.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
were all covered with geometric design. They were really beautiful. They weren't real big, you know, like maybe this large.
Beautiful.
Yeah, they were gorgeous.
Yeah. Did you have one?
What is this black part? What is that made of?
Okay, I'm going to tell you how they're made in just a minute. If we could hold on, we'll get another one and I'll have another style, and then I'll tell you really in detail the process of making these. But the wheel, the Minoans had the wheel, pottery wheel. So, and the Chinese had it long before that. So wheels pretty early. Before that, before the wheel, they would either slab build or coil build, where you just have a long coil and you pile it up like that and then smooth the sides, and you can get a pretty good rounded pot. But the wheel is pretty early. So craters are definition, a wide mouth vessel. That's what defines a crater. And now this is a specialized funerary crater, but an ordinary crater you would have in your home it functions as a mixing vessel. It's a wide mouth, it's more like a bowl than anything else. It's where you mix water and wine. That's what a crater is for, is mixing water and wine. Because the Greeks drank a lot of wine, but they mixed it with water. It was diluted, very diluted. And that's what a crater would be used for. Now this one, you can see, first of all, I want to point out this design at the top. That's very Greek. That's called the meander design. And whenever you see this design, that's Greek influence. Somebody's seen Greek art, or they know it comes from Greece. So it starts showing up in Rome. It's understood as a Greek design. The sort of wandering, meandering line actually has nothing to do with the way we use the word meander. It comes from the Meander River. There's a river in Greece called the Meander River, and it winds like that. So then later, the word meander started to mean wandering around sort of aimlessly. I'm going to meander over there, but that's where it comes from. It comes from the river. It's another one of those word changes like the word labyrinth, which didn't really originally mean the way we use it today. It originally meant house of the double axis, and now it means a maze, but that's where our words come from. You know, so many people, you know, we think of the Latin roots and sources of our language, but we're not aware of really the Greek roots of our language. There's just as much Greek roots in English as there is Latin. It's just most people never study Greek and therefore don't recognize it, but it's there. Let's look at the scene. There are a number of different registers, and they're divided by these sort of geometric patterning. It's almost as if, you know, they're afraid to leave any space empty. We call that horror vacui. Horror vacui means like the fear of open spaces. So they're literally afraid to leave anything open. So everything's just filled in with geometry. It's typical. So it's a funeral. This is the deceased here on a funeral, an open pyre, and mourners. This is sort of the register that's mostly women. Mourners, and their hands are up like this, like they're tearing their hair out and wailing, and that is meant to symbolize sort of mourners. You can see the bodies reduced to these simple triangular shapes, of sort of taking the human form and reducing it to this very minimal difference. And then the lower level, now this is the male, identifying this man, the deceased, as probably a warrior, and these are his fellow warriors, and they're sort of a parade. They're getting ready for the funerary games. Remember when we, you know, in the mythology class, we talked about that, funerary games, when somebody dies, and in Homer, in the Iliad, when Patroclus dies and they have the funeral games, and it's like the Olympic Games or competitions is typical for a funeral. And so these are all the soldiers, and they're getting ready, processing up for the games. One of the most interesting parts is the chariot there with the horses in the middle, and we've got 3 horses. How many? We know there are 3 horses because there are 3 heads. So we're going to assume that means there are 3 horses. And then we get 6 front legs and 6 back legs, but the torso just sort of merges together in one black silhouette.
Is everything just on one side?
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, you say there's 3 horses, but what's on the other side of this?
No, it's all the way around.
So
I've never seen the other side of this particular one. There are other vases I can show you. I never seen the other side of this vase. I truly don't know. But there are other vases I'll show you where we do have both sides. But generally, it's not usually continuous. It's usually a different scene, like this scene and then that scene. And they're usually, sometimes they're related, sometimes they're not. This one, I just don't know. Yeah, Linda?
Peggy, the women up on the top left.
Yes.
Are they in the profile like we would have seen in the Egyptian?
It's not the Egyptian composite, because you're seeing all of it from the front. You're seeing the upper torso from the front. You're also seeing the legs, you're seeing the legs from the front down to the calves. They've kind of turned the calves on the side, right? A little bit, and then the feet are from the side. So it's not totally the same, but it's mostly frontal, but not all frontal. The head is turned.
Okay.
Do you know how you know those are women? You
Waist.
No, the men have pretty tiny waists too. There's 2 little bumps right there. Those are breasts. That's how you know. How do you know these are men? There's a little bump right there on his thigh. That's a penis. That's how you know. No other way. The bodies are the same otherwise. There's no other way. Other than a woman wouldn't drive a chariot or carry weapons or whatever. But the women actually were very involved in funeral rites. They're the ones that prepared the body, prepared the feast. So this is sort of the realm of women, and down below is the realm of men. But what's interesting is see this strange shape, the shield. That's actually a Mycenaean shield. This is very early. That's not a typical Greek. That's not the shield that later Greeks will use. It's sometimes called a figure 8 shield. That's actually Mycenaean style. It's something that made it through the Dark Ages, that in this early period, they're still carrying these Mycenaean shields in front of them. So that's meant to be a shield that he's carrying. But even as crude really in design as these figures are, there's still care to be accurate. You know, he's still going to put in 6 front legs and 6 back legs, even though it's odd looking, he's not going to not do it because accuracy matters. I mean, you might question that given the image doesn't look very accurate. Nonetheless, the function of, well, maybe we'll go ahead and tell you about the chemistry of this right now. Let me see if I have to look at my notes for chemistry because I'm not a chemistry person. Actually, I don't think I have it with me. So I'm going to have to see what I can remember. First of all, we call this vase painting, but it's not. There's no paint on a vase. The color variation comes from the process, the chemical process in firing. A black figure vase, see if I can remember this right. You first paint on the figures with a slip. And a slip is basically, anybody do ceramics here? Everybody, okay, you correct me if I get this wrong. A slip is basically like a liquid clay, but it has this different chemical makeup than the clay body. And so you paint that on. And then when you put it in, you start with an oxidizing atmosphere here. And when you let in oxygen into the kiln, it all turns black. Or it all turns red. It all turns red. And then you remove the oxygen and it all turns black. And then you put the oxygen back in again. And only the parts that do not have the slip turn red. The red is from the iron in the clay. So if you've covered up that clay, it cannot receive oxygen and therefore it remains black where the body turns red. So it's a way of playing with the chemistry of the clay and its oxidizing potential. And that's why the Athenian clay is best for this process, because it's this beautiful natural red. So it's oxygen, and it's called an oxygenating atmosphere, and then a reduction atmosphere where you remove the oxygen and then you put the oxygen back in, and that causes the coloration to change. So that's how you get those colors. Yeah, there's our horse. You could see him a little bit better with his 3 heads and all of his 12 legs. So that was just the early period. Now, I'm not going to show anything from Orientalizing. It's called that because this is a period where a lot of influence from the Near East comes in. So it's called Orientalizing. They always, in fact, through the 19th century, we tended to refer to the Middle East as the Orient. It's not the way we use the term today at all, but when they refer to the Orient, they often meant the Middle East. So Near Eastern influence was coming in, but I'm not going to look at that. I'm going to jump to the Archaic, and we're going to look at a site, a Greek site, located in one of the colonies, colony in Italy. This is the tip of Italy, and you can see there are a lot of Greek colonies in Italy. This is how all those Greek myths got there. We're going to look at a site called Poseidonia, and Poseidonia is sacred to, of course, Poseidon. Poseidonia, secondarily to Hera, as we'll see, Poseidon and Hera, but it's modern day Paestum, but in the ancient world, it was called Poseidonia. And we're going to look at one of the earliest of the, well-preserved stone archaic temples. So the Archaic period is when they begin working in stone, where we start getting the first temples and the first sculpture. And this is an early and somewhat unusual temple. It's in very good shape. It's called the Temple of Hera I, and it's called that because there's another temple to Hera not very far away called Hera II, which is a little later in date. So this is Temple of Hera I, and that is a plan of the temple. You can see how it's really rooted in the old Mycenaean Megaron style, a simple rectangle in this case with columns. I want to get some terminology down as well. Let me see, do I have another? Yeah, let's wait on the terminology. First of all, it's in unusually good shape. Most temples this old are not in as good a shape. More of the columns have fallen, but this is actually a really sturdy building. One of the things we see that changes in temples as they get later is things like the columns will get narrower and taller. So this is very heavy. It looks heavy. You know, the columns are fat. The entablature seems to almost press down on it. It is a very sturdy building physically, it's probably why it hasn't fallen. But I want to look at the parts of it. Clearly, the central rooms have collapsed because you can see, you know, straight through it, but most of the exterior and the facade are still in place. It's in the Doric style. We call it an order. The orders refer to different styles of architecture. There are three orders of Greek architecture. The Doric is the oldest, the earliest, the simplest, and the plainest. So Doric at this point, the next order is Ionic, and then later is Corinthian, but this is a Doric order. The Greeks are, I'm not going to say are, I'm going to say were. I don't want to speak about modern day Greece, but the ancient Greeks were obsessive. And they were obsessive with order, with things being done in a very specific way. They liked systems. They liked things that can be calculated mathematically and geometrically. And so when you have something like an order of architecture, that refers to, it's almost like a set of rules for how you put something together. And every Doric temple must have the same parts in the same place and relate to one another in the same way. So for a Doric order is made up of a column, which is a series of stacked drums, just like we saw the Egyptian columns. In this case, fluted. Greek columns will always be fluted. That's not true with Roman, but Greek columns are fluted. The flutes are those vertical cuts or striations that you see in the columns. The question as to why they fluted the columns, there are different interpretations. On the one hand, some people say it's to disguise the breaks in the drums, because again, just like the Egyptian temple, you can see those column drums pretty clearly, how they're stacked. Originally, it wouldn't have been so evident, and fluting it would have helped disguise that even more. The other argument is that no, they're meant to make it look like trees, because that's what columns are replacing. When they built wooden buildings, it appears that they use actual tree trunks like that as supports. And so when columns were made, they're carving the column in such a way that it reminds you of or references tree bark in a way. So they look like the bark of a tree, which is interesting. And if that were only it, I might say, well, maybe, but there are other detailed elements in stone that are more obviously referencing wooden parts, as it would have looked like if they had been wooden. So it is likely that that is part of it as well. Just like the Egyptian temples, they have a capital on top of the column. In this case, the Doric capital, it's the quickest way to recognize a temple if you want to know what order it is, just look at the capital, because those are dramatically different in each order. The Doric order is obvious. It's a two-part order with a simple rounded cushion-like form, the bottom part, and then on top of it is a more geometric form. Now, why the capital? What is the function? I think this is one of the most Greek-like elements in architecture. It's subtlety and sophistication. That's what Greeks are about. When you're looking at a temple like this, say you're looking at the column and it's round, you know, it's a cylinder, it's going up. So your eye is seeing one type of form and you're drawn up. And then above that on top, this is called the entablature, the horizontal element. That's a very different thing from a rounded form. It's a straight line, hard edge geometric form. So how do you visually transition the eye from one type of form to another type? Well, that's what the capital does. That's what the Doric capital does. The bottom half being rounded mimics the shape of the column. And so it begins to lead your eye up. And then the top half of the capital is geometric like what's above it. And so it becomes a transitional element. It's literally it's a bridge between the rounded column and the straight entablature above it. It's a subtle, very, very subtle visual element that most people would never be consciously aware of when you look at it. But that didn't matter to the Greeks. It functioned subtly. And much of what we see in the architecture is so subtle, it's not visual, it's not obvious to the eye. Above that, in the Doric order, the entablature is divided into two parts, and the upper portion is made up of alternating forms that run all the way around the building. It's made up of what are called triglyphs and metopes. A triglyph literally means in Greek 3 marks, triglyphs, 3 vertical elements. And then the metope is where sculpture can go. There are rules as to where you can put sculpture on a Greek temple. There are 2 places. You can, if it's a Doric temple and you have a metope, you put sculpture there. You can also put it in the pediment. And the pediment is the triangular, there are 2 pediments, one on each end. The triangular element created by the pitched roof, you can have sculpture in there. But that's it. You can't just carve anything randomly. There are rules. This is an order and you have to follow that order. So the elevations, what you're looking at is an elevation. We use a lot of elevations. Elevation is a vertical, it's like looking at the vertical parts of a thing. So if you look at a facade of a building, as you look at its parts vertically, that's called an elevation. You're looking at the elevation. You can have an internal elevation as well. If you imagine cutting a building down the middle and then looking at the inside vertically, and we'll do that when we come to like Gothic cathedrals and the like, we'll look at the internal elevations because those are really important as well. So just some architectural terminology here. Yes.
This is kind of a silly question, but, so these drums, I'm presuming they call it a drum because it sort of looks like the shape of a
Yes, drum. Yeah, I
Okay.
assume so too.
So does anybody know, are they like, is there like a hole or anything in the middle?
Yes, yeah, there are. There are holes, and then they use metal, pieces of metal that slide down into one and then slip over the other. So they're what, yeah, they probably iron. This is the Iron Age, so they could have used metal. So there are like dowels.
But there weren't any like kind of seatings or anything, like, you know, the top of one would be kind of in.
Well, no, they're flat with the hole in the middle and the dowel. So
Okay.
that's all you need.
Alright.
Yeah.
But they're
But
carved, right?
but what?
But they're carved.
Oh, they're carved, and every drum is unique. You don't just carve a bunch of identical drums and stack them. Look at the column. Every one of those drums has its own unique position in that column. And every drum has to be carved for that position. And it will get more complicated than that because you notice they're not vertical at all. They swell. And that's called entasis. That's another one of the subtle refinements. All Greek columns swell. Now, this is very early, so it's visible to the eye. You can clearly see. Later columns still swell, but you can't see it because it's much more subtle. We'll talk about why they do that. We all have our reasons. We'll talk about it when we come to the Parthenon. But entasis is swelling of columns. Now, the proportions of these columns are 4:1. The height of the column is 4 times the maximum width. That's actually very squat. You know, later they're going to be much thinner and taller. The ratios will change. So also in the archaic, forgot to talk about the plan. This is an unusual plan because it actually has a ridge pole and a row of columns going down the center. It's the only temple of this kind that has that. First of all, it has a peristyle surrounding it. A peristyle, okay, first of all, a row of columns with an entablature over it is called a colonnade, right? Colonnade is just a row of columns. If you take that colonnade and either curve it around or square it off and come back to itself. In other words, if it encloses something, that's called a peristyle. And most Greek temples are peristyle temples. Most of them have rows of columns that go all the way around the outside. So it's a typical peristyle temple. But and it has a single room in the center called the cella. The function of the cella is to hold the cult figure of the god or goddess to whom the temple is dedicated. These were not places of worship. These were not places where you went inside and rituals were held. They were purely for holding the sculpture. And there's usually a room at the back, whoops, try this again, a room at the back. Okay, which sometimes called the treasury, but that's where the ritual items were kept. When there were religious festivals and ceremonies, that all took place outside. So all that stuff would be hauled out, and outside is where you would have the rituals, not inside the building. So that's why it's so odd to have a center ridgepole. It strangely has an odd number of columns. It has 9 columns by 18 columns, which is not the typical proportion. It is early. They haven't, found the perfect ratio yet. The problem with an odd number of columns along the entrance side is that means you're going to have a column in the middle. You don't want a column in the middle. You want a door in the middle, an open space in the middle, so you can look straight down at the cult figure, because Greek temples all face east. So the rising sun would shine in the door and shine on the great sculpture, the oversized sculpture of the god or goddess. Now, the fact that this has this ridgepole, it has 2 doors, and it has a column in the middle, has led to the belief that, and I think most people accept this, that while this is the temple of Hera, it probably had 2 cult figures in it, probably Hera and Poseidon as well. So if there were 2 sculptures down here to be seen, then it makes sense to have an opening here and here. That's the only reason it would make sense not to have a central space. And it's the only temple like that. It's the only one dedicated probably to 2 gods.
So do they know, is there a roof on there and?
It's gone, but it would have been a pitched roof,
And it would have been.
stone. It would have been stone.
Oh, it would have been stone.
Yeah,
And were there walls inside too, those?
just this room. Yeah, this would have been stone wall. This is a room, so this would have been stone walls.
What do you mean by ridgepole? Describe that.
Just a long pole that ran right down the middle,
Oh, okay.
and holding that pole up are these columns.
Okay. Huh.
But we're not gonna see that again.
What are those other things that go along there? You have the 2 cult figures, one on each end, but what are all those things in the middle?
These,
Yeah,
those are columns.
are they gone from this?
Yes.
Temple?
Oh, I'm not sure. None of the angles I've seen, I can't tell whether those columns are still there or not. You can't really see from the photos I've seen. I can't tell. They may be standing, but the walls are certainly down because you can see all the way through. I don't know if those columns are standing.
It's odd that the outside still exists and the inside.
Well, the inside were just walls. They're more vulnerable to earthquakes. Those columns are very stable. They have heavy weights on top of them. They're big and round, so they're harder. Columns always are going to stand longer than the walls. In most of the temples, the cella walls are down, but the columns will stand.
So they took the other stuff out and put it in something else, I guess.
Yes, Bonnie?
Where was all this stone quarried from?
Mostly from the islands. Mostly they're building from, there are 2 or 3 different Greek islands that have beautiful types of marble, all different colors, but it's the islands that have the good stone. So they're bringing them in on ships from the Greek islands.
Huge pieces of stone.
And this is in Italy, so Italy has a lot of good quarries too. So there's plenty of marble around of all different colors. Huh? This is in Italy. This is in Poseidonia, which was a Greek colony on the boot of Italy. Now, the sculpture also begins to appear during this period in stone. Now, we do know that they made wooden sculpture because people have talked about it. None of them, remain, but there's clear talk about wooden sculptures, so we know they had wooden sculptures. What we're looking at here are two sculptures that are only 70 years apart and really, really quite different. One on the left is a really good, one of our best examples. It's known as the Metropolitan Kouros. The Kouros figures are very common from the Archaic period. Kouros simply means man in Greek. Kouroi is the plural. And the one on the left from around 600, these were both actually used as grave markers. Typically, these kouros non-specific figures were used either as grave markers, or sometimes they were used to line a roadway into a sacred precinct. There's some discussion of like sacred entrances, say into Delphi, or sacred sites, where it might be lined with figures like this. The one on the left is called the Metropolitan Kouros because it's in the Metropolitan. And as I said, it's earlier, good, about 6'4". So I don't know whether they're counting the base in that or not. Probably not, but I don't know for sure. Rarely do you find Greek sculpture over life size. It's not like Egypt where, the pharaohs had 30-foot tall sculptures. You just don't see that in Greece, other than the gigantic cult figures inside of a temple. Those are going to be big, but mostly they're not. And then the one on the right from about 70 years later is known as the Anavisas Kouros because it was founded in Anavisas. Now, both of these, Anavisas is just south of Athens in Attica. It's not too far away. Both of these are archaic and primitive in style. The one on the left is much more stylized than the one on the right. It's gradually becoming more naturalistic. The one on the right is definitely more naturalistic in the figure, but yet they still have a lot in common, both carved in marble. You can see that one of the principal early influences is Egyptian sculpture. I mean, clearly they've seen Egyptian sculpture, are familiar with it. That's the Raware figure that we have in the Nelson Gallery, the stance with 1 foot forward, the hands at the side, standing straight up. However, Greek figures are never in that closed style. Remember the closed style where it's no carving, no open spaces. The Greek is open, which makes them slightly more naturalistic. Also, if you could see it from the side, most Egyptian sculpture have their weight almost entirely on the back leg, and the front leg is sort of just sticking out, where the Greek figures have their weight equally divided. They're leaning forward a little bit more. It's not quite as stiff, although they're pretty stiff. And actually the Egyptian figure, the body is more naturalistic than most of the Greek, but they're moving in that direction. The other influence is Near East. Like when we look at their faces, you see the large staring eyes that we saw in the earlier figures, the hair, the very stylized wig-like hair, which we saw here. So they've seen the Near East as well. This clearly points out the fact paint is still clearly visible on this one. In fact, his eyes, there's still paint on his eyes, and he has what's called the archaic smile. This guy, people keep saying he has the archaic smile, but I've never seen it. But the Anavisas Kouros clearly does have we don't know why they did that. It's short-lived. Just in the late archaic period, they would put the smile, whether it was an attempt to just give it more life, make it a little more lifelike possibly, but we don't really know for sure why they did that. They were painted. You can see that clearly some remains because they are nude figures. And I want to talk about why that is as well. The bodies weren't painted. Typically, the bodies would be rubbed with wax, which would sort of fill in the marble and make it a little more like flesh. And then things like eyes, hair, etc., sometimes lips, would be painted. When we do look at a female figure, which were clothed, we'll see more color there. So the difference in the faces is interesting. The Metropolitan Kouros is very, very flat. And it's basically the face on one plane, almost like a mask, where with the Anavisas Kouros, the face is starting to sort of curve around a little bit more, again, moving toward that greater naturalism. In the piece, the eyes are more naturalistic, although they're still not. And also the hair, there's a difference. The Metropolitan Kouros, the hair just hangs down in a very straight, stiff line, where the Anavisas Kouros, you can see it sort of curves a bit. It's reacting to his body. These are little subtle changes, but they're a difference. They're moving in a direction, in a certain direction. There are very few female figures from this period or most periods. When they're almost always of a goddess. Although this is known as the peplos Korae, it probably represents Athena. It was found on the Acropolis after it was destroyed by the Persians, and much more paint on it. In fact, it's been reconstructed. This is what it would have looked like when it was fully painted. Most people don't want to see that, don't want to think about them being painted because it's kind of garish. And we're used to the beautiful white pristine marble, which is how we want to think of them, but they were painted like that. Her arm, that missing arm, it was a separate piece. You can see that it was inserted. It was a separate piece of marble inserted. You can see how smooth that hole is there. That's the main reason why she appears to be Athena, because Athena is typically shown with one arm out like that, and often her owl is sitting on her hand. Yes.
So how do they figure out the paint colors?
Well, there is just enough remaining in bits and places that they could chemically determine the color. They're pretty good. Archaeologists have to be chemists too these days.
So they're able to like somehow test the marble to kind of find.
Yeah, there's enough paint remaining in little tiny bits that they can chemically determine what color it was. So there's enough remaining. And she clearly has the archaic smile. She's the direct equivalent. They're pretty much the same date. Let's look at an amphora. The archaic period is usually considered an early period. So most of the time people think of the next, which is the classical period, as really the golden age. But I'm not sure I would agree with that in terms of vases. I think the archaic period is a really, for me, a brilliant age of vase painting. And personally, it's just my favorite. I prefer the archaic vases, especially the amphoras. Amphoras were often highly prized in ancient world. And in fact, in Athens, they were Athenian vases were exported all over the Mediterranean area. We find them everywhere. And they were often given as prizes. In competitions, your prize for winning a competition would be an amphora. And in fact, that's the source of the idea of the cup, the trophy cup, the so-called loving cup or whatever. Using those as a trophy comes from ancient Athens, where amphoras were used as awards and gifts. And this is the most famous, certainly of the archaic, and I would say really of all Greek vases, is the very famous Exekias vase, which was an award and is in really great shape, was protected always because of its importance. It is black figure style still. It's just before it's one of the last of the black figure when it was still popular. Much more simplified from that early geometric that had all those registers and everything filled in. There's still some geometric detail, but not a lot, not as much. And a lot of these just simple dark bands as well. But I want to look at the image and how it relates to the vase. It's called the Exekias vase because it was made by Exekias. Typically, potter and painter were two different people. Typically, one person made the vase with the potter and then handed it off to someone who put in the figures and the detail, the so-called painter. But in this case, he signed it on the bottom that said, Ezekias made and painted me. So this was a case where one person did both. It's not the only case, but it is rare to be that good at both. It's to me, this has just the perfect proportions, perfect ideal proportions, which are based on sort of the human form. We have the terminology, you know, vases have necks and shoulders and bodies and feet. I mean, the language we use for a pot is the language of the human body. And in this case, it's just an absolute perfect proportion. And the story, the figures, the narrative is also proportionally perfect for the surface of the vase, and nothing else is quite the same. It's that beautiful red Athenian clay again. It's a scene from Homer's Iliad. It's a point in the story where Achilles on the left is not fighting. Remember, Achilles felt slighted by Agamemnon and refused to fight. And half of the book is about the other warriors trying to talk him into coming back into the battle because they're losing and not doing well because their greatest fighter got into a snit because he didn't get treated the way he thought he should. And so he refused to fight and allow all of his friends and fellow warriors to all go out and die. I mean, it's a bizarre story, but it's very Greek and it's very understandable if you understand Greek storytelling and so on. He's in there, he's in his tent with his friend Ajax, and they're playing drafts, so playing a board game, playing drafts, and there's little words coming, there are words on here you can see, there's some words coming out of their mouths and some words written up here. It says tessera, which means four, so he's made a move and he's saying four. Drafts, from my understanding, is some sort of cross between checkers and chess. It's some sort of game where you move things, certain spaces, whatever. I don't know too much more about it. They're both absolutely beautiful figures. They're designed and scaled so that their backs, the sort of curving of their backs, just parallels the sort of curving of the shoulder. You know, the shoulder of the man matches the shoulder of the vase, and it just curves beautifully. They're wearing they're symmetrical. It's this perfect, beautiful symmetry. It's not bilateral symmetry. Symmetry doesn't mean each side has to be the mirror image of another. It just has to be visually balanced. Now, the fact that one is wearing a helmet and the other has their helmet over here, it's still symmetrical. The focus is in the center and your eye is drawn right down here to the board. There's a real intensity to this as they're very intensely focusing, and their eye, this strange big frontal eye on the side of their face, is drawing your attention right down here as well, as are their lances, which create this V, this line, which draws your eye right down there. So it's a powerful design. And then very beautiful are these capes, these almost lace-like capes they have on. That's what makes this a very special vase, very expensive vase. The amount of effort and work because once you lay down the slip, you would have to go in there with a little tool and lift the slip up from all these little areas so that they can turn black while parts of it stayed red. It's very, very complicated, but beautifully done. It really just shows the competition of the Greeks. The Greeks were very competitive. Everything was a competition. Art was a competition. Plays were a competition. Yeah, Ryan?
The heel, Achilles' heel.
Oh, that's from his death. Remember, Achilles' mother was the daughter, she was a nymph, the daughter of a river god. And when he was born, she was afraid for his life. There was an oracle that he would die. So she wanted to make him immortal. So she dipped him into the river Styx. She held him by his heel and dipped him into the river Styx so he would be immortal. But his heel didn't get dipped. So his heel was vulnerable. And so he's killed in the Trojan War by an arrow that hits him in the heel. It's a poisoned arrow that hits him in the heel. So that's his Achilles heel. That's where that comes from. Somebody asked me once about his Achilles tendon. I said, no, that's different. That's something else. It's his heel. Now, this is one in the Nelson Gallery that we looked at when we were over there one day with at the end of the last class. This is really a beautiful vase. It's a beautiful red figure vase. Now, notice the figures are red and the background is black. It's a reversal. And once they figure out how to do this process, which is very similar, you just paint the background in, the slip is the background rather than the figures. It allows you then to go in with a fine brush and paint slip detail. See all these lines in the body, the facial features. You couldn't get that kind of detail in black figure, but you can in red figure. So it became much more popular and more or less replaced black figure style once they started doing this because they liked detail. This is also a scene from the Silesius painter the name refers to a vase painter who is known because of a lot of vases he did with Silesius, who was a satyr. So he's known as the Silesius painter. We don't know his name, but we can recognize his work. And it's voting for the arms of Achilles. When Achilles was killed in the Trojan War, typically what happened is your armor would have been given to the next hero, whoever's going to replace him as the next great leader and hero. And several people wanted that, and so they had to vote. Who's going to get it? Is it Ajax, his friend he was just playing the board game with, or whatever? And so they voted. So this is the vote. They're all voting and putting like a little stone, or sometimes they would use a piece of clay with a name on it. And Odysseus won the vote and was awarded his armor. And Ajax was so humiliated by this that he committed suicide because of that incident. So it's a very important moment. Now this face has different proportions and I don't think it's as good. It's proportionally it's different. And when you look at them, not only are the styles different, but so is the proportions are different. Just the nature of that curve of the one on the left, to me, is a more perfect. I don't know how to really identify why I think that. Maybe it's just personal, but this seems to swell too much down here. I like this sleek, this curves in just a little bit more here. So I think it's a little more refined, but that's just my view. There are also a few of these wonderful bilingual vases. I just wanted to really quickly show you one. This is one vase, two sides of one vase. This is the same vase. One side is black figure, the other side is red figure. How do you do that? How do you fire a bilingual vase? Because it may not be as complicated. I've never tried it. I've never done ceramics, but it seems to me like the firing process would be inherently different on the two sides. But they're two different, notice there are two different guys who painted it. One is a red figure painter, one is a black figure painter. So you've got specialists doing their own side. It's a really interesting vase, and right from that moment of sort of transition, they both show you the same scene painted by two different people. Those of you who had the mythology class might be able to recognize what this is or who this is. He's wearing, you probably can't tell, but he's wearing like a lion's head, lion skin. Yep, Heracles. Greek, Heracles, and one of his tasks had to do with the marathon bull. So this is Heracles and the marathon bull, which is he had to bring back. He had to go to Crete. He got it from Crete, where it was known as the Cretan bull, and then brought it back, and it became the marathon bull. He had to bring it in, but then it got returned. Anyway, it's Heracles and one of his tasks. Okay, how do we get from the archaic period to the classical period? And I'm not sure I want to spend quite as much time on this as I do sometimes, because I don't want to get too far behind, unless you want me to go into it. It's totally up to you. Some of you have learned about the Persian Wars in the mythology class. Others of you weren't in that class. The reason I go into more detail on the Persian War is it changes the Greek sensibility. And I don't think you understand their attitude in the classical age without understanding how they saw themselves in relation to this war with the Persians. The Persian Wars lasted roughly from 490. However, the great Persian Empire over here, which we talked about before. Remember when we looked at Persia and we looked at the palace here at Persepolis, and I said right about this time, they're gonna run into conflict over here. Well, now it's that time. And the Greeks all have colonies along here. You have the great Persian Empire pushing its way westward and trying to control more and more of those regions. So we're going to have a problem. And the problem begins earlier, but by 510, they can't ignore it anymore. 510 is the Ionian Revolt. It's when these Ionian colonies along the coast over here get so angry that they, send emissaries back to the cities that founded them and say, listen, you guys are ignoring us. These Persians are moving west. Therefore, if you're not going to take care of us, we secede. We don't need you anymore. We're pulling out of the Hellenic League. The Hellenic League was this grouping of basically Greek city-states. And they just said, forget it, we're pulling out. Well, that got their attention. But by this time, Darius, the emperor of the Persians at that time, they were moving westward. And this green line here is this early campaign in 490. They're island hopping, and the Persians are just one island after another. They're moving across. Now, remember, the Persians had conquered much of the known world in the West, and they were a huge empire. And they're pushing westward now into tiny little Greece. And by 490, they end up on the shore of the mainland at Marathon. And at Marathon, we have really a very famous battle, one of the most famous battles of all time, which is studied in military colleges, I know, in which we see the tactics of two very, very different people coming together. In terms of the numbers, they vary vastly. Nobody knows exactly how many. Some people say 100,000, 300,000, 10,000. Nobody knows how many there were on each side because a lot of the writers at the time, were lying and making things up. Supposedly, Darius sent 600 ships, which would have implied about 30,000 men on the ships and another 25,000 foot soldiers. There were sea battles going on at the same time. There were land battles. The Greeks fought in a very different way than the Persians had ever seen before. They fought using a phalanx system. That's a phalanx. Wait a minute, Siri thought I talked to it again. Siri keeps picking up my voice and thinks I'm asking for something. It's annoying. Stop it, Siri. I better be careful. A phalanx is what you see there. It's a tight rectangle of soldiers with shields all the way around and above. It's almost like an armored tank moving as one. And it's a very strong fighting unit. And it's something the Persians had never seen before. They have these very long pikes. As you can see, here's one of the hoplites. A hoplite is a civilian soldier. Greek citizens, boys, were required from the age of 18 to 20 to serve briefly in the military. They did not have a standing army. These were citizen soldiers. You were a citizen, you did your job, you ran your farm, you whatever. And if you were needed, you stopped, you got your armor and you went and fought, but you weren't like full-time soldiers. That nobody had that yet, obviously, other than the Persians, of course, at this point. But they also had some professionals, the epilektoi, who were not as many of them, but they were very feared. And then there were also some volunteers. But the majority were made up of hoplite fighters, and that's who these are. They have good equipment. They have good shields. They have good bronze weapons and good bronze shields. Where the Persians had wicker shields, if you could imagine, wicker shields. And their armor, they didn't have the big long lances. So very few Greeks were quite powerful compared to the Persians. You have to understand the Persians hadn't really fought a real battle in a long time. By the time they were that big, anybody saw them coming, just laid down their arms and opened the door. I mean, they really weren't a top of the line fighting army. And they were hopping across these tiny islands, which of course they conquered very quickly. They weren't expecting opposition, and they certainly weren't expecting good opposition, and plus smart opposition. The Greek forces made up mostly of Athenians. Spartans couldn't get there in time. They had a religious festival and couldn't show up, but there were Plataeans and others. Now, typically when you have two armies lining up, you put your best soldiers in the middle and then your weaker on the outside. But the Greeks did just the opposite. You see, the Persians did that. They had their strong forces here. They also knocked a bunch of trees down on the plain, which created this narrow passage that the Persians had to march through. So the Greeks stood at this point, and then as the Persians neared, they began to draw back, and the Greeks drew back, but they drew back further in the middle than on the sides. And as the Persians came forward, the two side arms of the Greeks, which are their best soldiers, came around and encircled the Persians. And it's the first documented use of what's called the pincer movement, which is really well known now in military colleges, and everybody knows the pincer movement, but Persians had never seen it before, and they were surrounded and had much less good weapons. So at this battle, about 5 days, the whole thing took. About 6,400 Persians died. Most ran back to their ships, and I think fewer than 200 Greeks died. But they ran to their ships, and there was a naval battle. A storm came up, and a lot of the Persian ships sank there as well. But Darius wasn't there. He was back in Persepolis, but the leader, Datis, I think was his name, said, well, this is too tough. Let's regroup. So they went back to their ships and went back to one of the islands. They can go home, but they left the mainland, went to one of the islands. And it took them a while as they regrouped, and it took a long time to do things then, just to get across the country or we don't think about how easy it is to get around and communicate today. It was a very different thing then. But they didn't come back for 10 years. And when they came back in 480, Darius was dead and his son Xerxes was on the throne. And now this time they weren't going to be surprised in the way they were before. So this time they come back with much greater numbers. And again, it varies as to how many, hundreds of thousands, but several 100,000 probably Persians. And this time they came on land, massive troops marching on land, as well as ships following the coastline. And they first encountered the Greeks in the south. Their first opposition is at Thermopylae, and this is where you have sort of the 300 as it's known. It's a narrow passageway with the sea on one side, and this is where approximately 10,000 soldiers, about 9,700 from Thebes, and then 300 elite Spartans held them off at this narrow passage. If you've got a narrow passage, it doesn't matter how many Persians there are, they've got to go through, just a few at a time. You just keep knocking them down. But then the Greeks were betrayed, and the Persians were shown a pass that went up through the mountains and came out behind them. And they got word early on, they knew that this was happening. And so the Spartans sent the 9,700 Thebans, sent them home. And the 300 Spartans stayed, and they tried to make it look like there were more there. It was a suicide mission. They knew they were going to die. It was a delaying tactic. They knew they weren't going to be able to beat them or defeat them, but they could slow them down. And they did. They slowed them down. And this is where Leonidas, the king, and the 300 Spartans held them off and gave the rest of the Greeks time to get back. The Persian ships began sailing down to Athens. Word got there. By the time the Persians arrived at Athens, which they did, the city was largely abandoned. That's what the Greeks did, was they just left. That really angered the Persians. There was nobody there to fight. It was just an empty city. So they just went around and knocked a few things down. They went up on the Acropolis and did a lot of damage. It's about all they could do. And then the next battle, then they had to go down to the sea battle at Salamis, which is really more or less decisive. It's one of the most interesting battles. Just shortly, this is a Greek trireme. The Greeks had these very sleek, swift ships called triremes. And the way you fought a naval battle in the ancient world is you rammed the other ship and tried to sink it. They had these big bronze pointy things on the front. And they were quite maneuverable, where the Persians, being made up of 27 different nation states, had a lot of different kinds of ships. They tended to be bigger, open water ships. They weren't as maneuverable. And so the Greeks were sort of trapped back here, where the Persians had them trapped on each side of the island. The leader of the Greeks, Themistocles, sent a message to the Persian, actually Xerxes was here, the Persian emperor came. He was sitting up on a hill up here watching and directing the battle. Sent a message and to the Xerxes and said, listen, I know we're gonna lose. Let me tell you what's going to happen. Our ships are going to try and break free around the west side of the island tonight. I know you're going to win, but keep me in mind that I helped you, when you win and take over Greece. And so they did what he wanted them to do, which was to send the entire Egyptian fleet. And the Egyptian fleet, Egypt was part of the Persian Empire, but they were known as the best fighters, and they had the best fleet. So he sent all of his Egyptian fleet around the west side of the island, but nobody showed up. The Greeks didn't go that way. It was a lie. They burst through this way. And in fact, there was a big storm too. A huge storm came up, and it was just all these ships, the Greeks just zipping through between them, and the Persian ships trying to turn around and getting rammed, and the sinking in the storm. And it's just chaos in this little space. The Greek ships just all broke free. And at that point, they knew they were in trouble. And the best they could do was to get all of the guys on land and in the city of Athens down on shipboard. There were still a lot of them on land in other places, but Salamis really was another decisive battle. And all they needed to do was mop up all the guys left on land. And that was literally the very last battle at Plataea, which was the biggest of all. There were over 200,000 total foot soldiers coming together to fight that battle. And the Greeks did defeat. I mean, if you're 1-to-1 with the Persians, the Greeks are going to win. I mean, they beat them when they were 10-to-1. They're sure going to beat them when they're 1-to-1. And so they took ship and left. Now, that was really the end of the Persian War, the Battle of Plataea. However, the Greeks didn't know that. They came back once before. Maybe they'll come back again. So they set up this group, this organization, this league, the Delian League it was called, because they met on the island of Delos, and they collected a lot of money. Think of it like NATO. NATO was an organization of states who came together for one particular reason. NATO was formed as protection against the Soviet Union. It had one enemy that everyone shared. That's what this was. These states that didn't even get along and more often were fighting each other came together, and they built this huge treasury of funds that they all put in on the island of Delos, and it was the Delian League. And they waited and waited, and the Persians never came back. And when the Persians didn't come back, and they were never going to come back, they just decided it wasn't worth it. The Greeks, in their minds, just defeated the great Persian Empire. But did they? It's still there. They just stopped its westward advance because the Persians decided it just wasn't worth it going over there. They had all this other territory. They just didn't need it. But to the Greeks, they defeated the whole Persian Empire. And so particularly Athens, who took all the credit. Athens said, we did it. Salamis, that was us. You know, we're the ones. You all owe us because we just saved your rear ends. And that's going to lead into the classical period. And the classical period, the sort of golden age of Greece, is when art and architecture really sort of reach the height of what identifies a Greek sensibility. Artists were more than just makers. They became philosophers, they became theoreticians, and expressed the glory of the world they lived in. That was their goal. And I'm largely talking about Athens. That was the center of culture. They're the ones that embraced this sensibility, dominated first by humanism, the idea of man at the center of all things. Mainly they meant in terms of the human body, the perfection of the human body, and that means the male body. Naturalism, something they've been moving slowly toward. Accuracy, naturalism. Anybody who comes from the field of literature out there, let me apologize for how I'm using the terms and explain myself. We have two terms we use, naturalism and realism. The way we use those terms is exactly the opposite as the way they're used in literature. And I've had many discussions with friends in the Department of English and of how we use the terms, but it's a really pretty exact swap. In the visual arts, naturalism refers to physical accuracy. If I make an image of a tree, it looks just like a tree. A dog looks just like a dog. That's naturalism. Realism is different. That's not what realism is, because they don't show you a real tree. They show you an ideal tree, a perfected tree. All Greek art is idealized. There's no realism in Greek art. In fact, there's no realism anywhere at all until the Romans come along. It's the first realism, as we'll see. Always ideal, always idealized. And we understand why a little later when Plato gets born and starts telling us what idealism is. Idealism was around in the culture long before Plato defined it. But what Plato said about it is, in fact, Plato openly told artists, you know, if you're making an image, don't look at the real world. Don't use that as your model. What you should look at is the ideal in your mind. The word ideal comes from the word idea. An ideal thing can only exist in your mind. There's the idea of the tree, and in your mind, it can be the perfect tree. But then that real one is going to be flawed. There's not a thing in the material world that isn't flawed. There's no perfect person, there's no perfect tree, there's no perfect table or rock or anything. Those only exist in your mind. Therefore, artists, you can look at a thing, but when you finish it off, use the one in your mind. That should be the source, the ideal in your mind. That's why there's no portraiture in Greek art. That's not real people. Real people are flawed. So we don't want it to be a real person. You can look at a person, and what you can do is, there's a guy over there that has a perfect nose, and there's somebody over there that has like really perfect ears, and you're a perfect height. Boy, you got a perfect build. Well, we'll put those all together and make the ideal person. That's who's in Greek sculpture, not any one. There's no one person out there that is ideal. That's idealism. And that's what drives art. So Greek art is idealized naturalism. The other important driving force is the idea of reserve, and especially in the classical period. Hold it back, nothing to excess, everything in balance. And that's why you don't see emotion. There is no emotion in true Greek art. No emotion. Emotions are human flaws. We want the ideal, right? In the ideal, there's no emotion. Interesting, because we know Greek myths are really emotional. Yeah.
So would you say that Michelangelo's David fits this?
No, Michelangelo's David is modeled very directly on Hellenistic Greek art, which is the later phase, which is all about emotion.
Okay.
It's the classic, it's not a classical. In fact, he was on site when a very famous Hellenistic sculpture was actually uncovered and modeled his work on Hellenistic. That late phase of Greek art is not purely Greek art. There are other influences that are making it very emotional. It was modeled on Greek, but not classical Greek.
Okay.
And let's look at one piece and then we'll stop. An early classical sculpture found on the Acropolis. A lot of sculpture found on the Acropolis because the Persians went around, knocked everything over and broke it. And then it gets covered up and buried, and then we dig it up later. So that was actually very good for us. This guy's like 3'10". It's not a life-size figure, but it is in classical work, and it's very different from the archaic pieces. He's known as the Critias boy. Critias was a sculptor, and we don't know that Critias made this, but archaeologists have said, well, this looks a lot like what Critias makes, so we'll call it the Critias boy, but we don't know. Probably represents, if it's on the Acropolis, it would represent a god, and some people say it's possibly an Apollo figure, but we don't know who it was meant to actually depict. But the stylistic differences are important. The most important is his stance. The archaic figures stood rigidly with two straight legs and their weight evenly divided on two legs. This guy stands naturally, the way we actually stand, which is with the weight on one leg and the other leg relaxed. And then we shift our balance. That's natural. You don't stand. In fact, you really can't. If you try it sometime, stand with your weight equally divided on two legs. Your legs will start cramping up. I mean, it's not a natural way to stand. This is natural, and it makes a difference. Here's our earlier piece to compare it to, and you can see how stiff he is. Now, when you put your weight on one leg, what that means is your whole body changes and shifts. Your hips shift. One side, one hip goes up while the other is down. This is not a fully developed contrapposto. Contrapposto refers to that stance, a weight shift stance, where your hips shift one way, your shoulders shift another, but it's not fully developed. Only the hips shift here. His shoulders are still horizontal, so that it's early. His face is also still very primitive and not very well defined. His torso is much more natural, the proportions, the legs. One of the things we do look at a lot in archaeology is knees. I remember looking at a lot of knees. Human knees are really complicated. If you've ever drawn or done figure drawing, look at knees, because of the complicated, musculature and joints, knees are really kind of complicated things. And in sculpture, that makes them complicated. And you can see the development of style just by looking at the knees of a sculpture, assuming you have knees. I've told some people this before, you've heard me tell this, but I did have a student ask me once why they made so many sculptures without arms and legs. We understand, right? They didn't. They broke. In fact, we don't know exactly where his arms were, although there's a little stud right down there. So it probably his arms were probably similar to this, because this stone is still pretty brittle, so it may have been attached. When we look at the face, we see it's softer, it's much more natural in terms of the curvature of the features. It's very generic in general. I mean, no way you'd recognize, think of that as like an actual person. But the hair is still very wig-like and stylized. It's not very natural in the hair. Now, the eyes would have been inset, probably with glass or stone, sometimes bone. So they just fell out or broke at some point, but there would have been more natural looking eyes. They're still kind of largish, but not as much so. So this early classical. And we'll stop there now, but I can't wait to start next time to show you the archaeological finds of a very, very important piece that was found in 72. Yeah, so we'll talk about these people and how this guy and how he and his fellow warrior were found. So any questions on comments, questions, anything on anything we have covered today? See, we got a lot of people on Zoom. They're all hiding, but well, if not, then we'll call it a day, and I'm gonna be back here next week. I don't care what happens. I don't like Zoom. I'm gonna be here in my coat if I need to, but this is I don't think it's supposed to get like below 0 or anything. It's supposed to be nice again. So we'll see you all next week. Bye, everybody at home and on Zoom.
We're going to still be in classical Greece. That is good.
Yeah. Mostly. I don't know if we'll get started in Roman or not. Possible we'll go started on Roman. No, we might. We might. We'll see. We shall see.